Hello, everyone. Pastor George here with today's episode of A New Thing, and I am going to start right off the bat. I haven't decided what I'm going to title this video, so maybe the title will give it away enough for people to know, but this is going to be a mature episode of this because we're going to be talking about something that happened in the news recently. And when I first heard that this happened, I went, how could that be about Christmas? Because I was like, man, it's the last new thing before Christmas. I should probably talk about something Christmas related. But then I went, you know what? Actually, this is Christmas related, depending on what part of the Christmas story you want to focus on. So that's where we're going to start today, and then I'll talk about what I want to talk about. If you can't tell already. So we're going to look at Luke chapter 2, 8 through 12. This is from the story of the shepherds, right? So this is what it says. It says, and there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today, in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger. Now, of course, who doesn't love hearing that? But what I want to focus particularly on today is the end of verse 10. Because we're obviously going to be talking about something a little risque, a little bit depressing, sad, depending on what your reactions are, or maybe across the board. And I want to focus on, this is kind of what's important for me when I hear stories like this. Firstly, I kind of course, am saddened, have a bunch of feelings about it, but I ultimately usually come around to, what if this person was to walk into our church? What would be the presentation of the gospel to them, right? How do we minister to this person? Now, chances are this person that I'm going to talk about is never going to go into our church, right? She lives in the UK, I think, or she lives here in the United States, but either or, right? Chances near zero. But as Christians, we need to prepare our hearts for this, because not in the case that she walks in, but how do we minister to other people, right, who have done maybe similar, but like way less in terms of maybe extravagance. I don't know the word you want to call this, but I think it's important, because what does he say? It says it's a cause of great joy for all the people, right? And this is something that is taken up with the gospel message, right? The reason that we can say people should be, it's good news, is because it's good news for everyone, right? Good news that will cause great joy this Christmas season. And so what does it mean for this situation or this person? How can Christmas, or the story of Christmas, be brought to people like this? So this is what I wanted to talk about. Some of you may have heard about this, but this is something that has been really popular over the past few days. So there was a documentary released on YouTube called "I Slept with 100 Men in 24 Hours" or something like that, and it's this OnlyFans star, Lily Phillips. So just a note, because I know my wife watches these things. I did have to Google who Lily Phillips was to find these articles. All right, don't nail me to a tree. Okay, I'm not on OnlyFans. For those who don't know, OnlyFans is a subscription service, basically, where you can pay people for content, and it wasn't designed for pornography, but that's pretty much what it's been used for. I think there are other things that people use it for, but pretty much when someone says OnlyFans, that's what it's being used for, right? And so this Lily Phillips lady, she's an OnlyFans star, all right? So I have nothing to do with that sort of thing. But I just wanted to point out, because, Google search history or whatever. So I have a purpose for this. I had to find this People article somehow. All right, anyway, enough of me trying to save my marriage. All right. So if you can't tell by the title of this, right, basically this documentary came out that showed, not explicitly, you can watch it on YouTube, it's not pornographic. It interviews her before and after she did this. And people are going all over the place and trying to psychoanalyze this and say things like this, right? Um, and this article talks about a lot of that. Uh, and obviously, when we hear something like this, it is meant to be shocking, right? Of course, this is tabloid fodder, and if you look up this on the news part of Google, you'll see all the tabloids from the UK and the United States. They're having a field day with this sort of thing. I mean, I'll show you a headline from TMZ in a second, right? TMZ is probably the pinnacle of kind of that, you know, sloppy kind of news sort of thing. Not intensive reporting, although I don't know what TMZ's reporting is like, but you get what I'm saying, right? So anyway, she went through all this, and there's a point after she does it where she cries. And a lot of people are saying, oh, see, this is the inside of her rebelling against kind of this, she said she was doing this as a stunt or all these other reasons, but she deep down realizes that she has done wrong, right? Well, she says that, or she doesn't say that, right? But it seems like it could be the case. That's certainly the story we would like to tell ourselves, but of course, as this TMZ headline says, great, OnlyFans, you gotta love TMZ, right? I think they're the only ones who are less like insane is the New York Post, who have insane headlines as well. But you'll see here, right? OnlyFans model Lily Phillips. I've learned from my mistakes. You get the three dots there, right? The ellipsis, and it says need buckets of lube to pull off 1K men sexcapade. So in case you didn't get that, right, what she's doing now is she's planning on sleeping with 1,000 men. She wants to break a record that another porn star set back in the 90s or something, or the early 2000s, where they slept with 900 men in one day. It's like, all right. So what happens, folks? This is our we're having a little fun this morning. I know it might be a little risque or stuff for us, but let's be adults here. All right, this is the world that we live in. How do we reach someone like this, or how do we reach the men that look at this content, or the women, like all the other women on OnlyFans, right, who believe that this is their way to stardom or to financial security or to all these other things, right? And to that, I think I want to turn to Romans. Because Romans 1 and the beginning of Romans 2, I think, have helpful things to say about this. Not only to ourselves and our hearts, but also explaining what we're seeing around us. Because if we are to reach these people, we need to know what the truth is. But then we need to go, okay, how do we bring the good news to a situation that's as messed up as this one, right? Putting it mildly, of course. All right, Romans 1. So Romans 1:18 through chapter 2:1, and this is probably one of the most famous parts of Romans. A lot of people know the Romans Road. The Romans Road is kind of, you walk people through the book of Romans, and it's a gospel presentation. And this is the sin part. But I think, and a lot of people shy away from this part of Romans. Obviously, parts of it are controversial for some of the things that Paul names. We're not going to be talking about those in particular today. I've talked about those before. One of the things, though, that I just think is important is that Paul is describing humanity here. You're going to see that he says they. By they, he means everyone. Okay? Everyone, including himself. So don't a lot of times these verses are taken and they're used to describe, or people might take them as saying, oh, it's those people, not us, right? No, Paul is saying all of humanity falls into this category. So this is what Paul says. He says, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. So Paul here is saying that everyone knows deep down that there is something there, that God is there, right? And this is, you could see this in Paul's day. He would say, hey, these are the gods, quote unquote, that you claim to worship, right? This divine nature is evident in you recognizing that there's something above yourself, right? And this is what we could say to people who practice other religions, right? We could say maybe that there are some truths in there, like, care for the poor or something, right? And we could say, yes, see, that's part of the invisible qualities that God has kind of placed in the world and on the human heart. That should turn you to worship Christ, right? That sort of thing. Or on the other hand, we could turn even to atheists and see an admission of this sort of thing, right? We could look at Camus or Sartre, things like that, right? The idea that they have of the absurd, or that, like, even if life has no meaning, we have to pretend that there's one in order to carry on, right? That idea that even that we yearn for meaning, I think, points us to these invisible qualities that Paul is talking about here. So what he says is that no one has any excuse before God, right? All of us deep down understand that this is something that exists, right? Whether we are sleeping with no one or sleeping with hundreds or thousands of people, right? All of us are aware of this matter. He continues, he says, "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal human beings and birds and animals and reptiles." So this is Paul's, you'll notice that Paul doesn't really talk about the fall with Adam and Eve in this. He actually roots sin in idolatry. Right. And I mean, of course, like, there's this idea of we claim to be wise, and you see this all over the place, right? Where people say, "Oh, I don't need this sort of thing. I'm too smart for that. I'm too smart for religion," right? That sort of thing. They claim to be wise, but they became fools, right? And they end up lifting up things that are of this world ahead of the invisible God, the invisible and immortal God. And it's interesting where Paul places this, because there's lots of problems people have. He's going to point this out, but notice where he goes first. Very interesting. He says, "Therefore God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen." So it's interesting that Paul, he doesn't go, "Oh, therefore they murder each other, therefore they steal." He's going to get to that. Don't worry. But you'll see that he talks firstly about sexual and sinful desires, because in Paul's mind, this is not that these are worse, but this is the most obvious evidence of a messed up kind of world that we live in, that people abandon kind of the created order that is given in Genesis, and they lust after lots of people, and completely give themselves into their desires. You'll see the desires of their hearts. This is something that the Bible is very strong against. I know it's very popular to say stuff like "follow your heart" or "the heart knows what's best." "To thine own heart be true," that sort of thing, like that, right? And there certainly is a sense of when the heart means like understanding what is most important, stuff like that. But usually what we mean by that is just follow what you enjoy or follow what you desire, right? And the Bible is very big on not doing that sort of thing, because human desire is warped by sin. And you see this so often in relationships between people, which is probably why Paul references this first, because this is the most obvious way that most people can kind of see this lived out in the world, right? We can see this very clearly in stuff like this, right? This is something that pretty much everyone can look at and go, "Ooh," across all cultures even, right? I mean, you'll see, if you look this up, you'll see lots of people cross the line being like, I haven't seen anyone say that this is a good thing. Even like very progressive outlets. No one's saying, "Oh, you know what, this is a good thing," something like that, right? They might spin it in a different way. What they'll say is, "Oh, it's not Lily Phillips' fault, it's the men's fault," or whatever, but doesn't matter. The point is, I would say yes to both of those. The point is that it is clear to a lot of people, and that's what Paul is getting at. "Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received themselves the due penalty for their error." So Paul here is using examples that he sees around him in the Greco-Roman world. Actually, what's interesting, just on historical note, is this is one of the only references to like lesbian acts that we have in the ancient world. It's not a very common thing that's written about in human history. This is one of the few places where we see it mentioned, which is interesting to think about. But also, I know that these are the ones that are really in our time very controversial. I'm not going to focus deep on them other than to just say Paul is using these as examples of what he previously stated, right? This idea that the natural created order has been upturned, and this is most obvious in the way people are using their bodies sexually. So he continues, he says, furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so they forget who God is, right? They go into idolatry, they start worshiping all these other things. So God gave them over to a depraved mind so that they do what ought not to be done. It's very interesting. You'll see that God gave them over. God gave them over. This is actually part of God's judgment on us. But he's also, what's so interesting, right? And this is why we need to be very careful with the way that we always talk about these things, is God is basically just giving them what they want, right? He's saying, hey, you want to deny me and you want these things? Fine. Here you go. You know, it reminds me of C.S. Lewis. He talks about hell, and he says anyone who ends up in hell is the person who they desire that sort of thing. They desire to end up there in terms of the biblical view, because they have chosen these other things over following God. Dallas Willard, a Christian philosopher, says in not in a mean way, but in a way that's just like, listen, you know, hell is sometimes the best thing that God can do for some people, right? And I'm not going to go deep down into that now, but this is all to say that God gives them over to what they desire, right? And so he says this. He says remember, they is humanity. He says they have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them. It's amazing, right? Because who can look at that list and say, oh, I haven't done any of that, right? All of us have done multiple of these, probably multiple times in our life, right? And this is really important, because when we look at this, and this is where I want to pull us back to Luke, right? Pull us back when we say good news. What does good news look like to Lily Phillips? Because so many of us will see this and we will go, I'm not here to psychoanalyze her, right? I'm here to psychoanalyze us and prepare our hearts to share the gospel with people. Not even psychoanalyzing, but you get what I'm saying. Theologizing. So many of us will see and go, and you'll see this, right? People go disgusting, depraved, terrible, maybe, and true, right? But what does it actually mean? What would it mean if you got 5 minutes in the room with her? What would you say to her, right? What would you try and tell her about her lifestyle? How would you do that in a way that is loving and honest? Because remember, Romans 2:1, it's not just pointing out that what's wrong with what she's doing. 2:1, it says, you therefore, you and me, right? You therefore, Paul says, have no excuse, you who pass judgment on someone else, for at whatever point you judge another, you are condemning yourself, because you who pass judgment do the same things. Now, of course, what you would say is, you say, Paul, I haven't slept with 100 people in one day. I'm not that disgusting. I don't sell my body on OnlyFans. I don't support OnlyFans, right? I try not to. I avoid pornography, try not to watch it, all these other types of things, right? So I'm the one who can, and certainly Paul would say, you can say what she's doing is wrong, but you as a person, as a human being, cannot stand and say, I am righteous and she is unrighteous because I'm so much better than her, right? Because we have done the same things. We have slandered, we have gossiped, we have been deceitful, right? We've been wicked, we've been greedy, we've not shown faith or love or mercy to people, right? And that is why it's so important when we think about this, is what if this person were to walk into the church? How do we talk to them in a way that is honest but loving and true about the good news of the gospel, right? How do we say what the angel says, right? Great news of good joy that will cause good news that will cause great joy all the people, right? How do we say, yes, all the people includes Lily Phillips, right? All the people includes the hundreds of guys that she's going to sleep with or has slept with. Hopefully she doesn't do that, but you never, whatever. Um, how does it include the people who watch it? How does it include all these other types of things, right? We can certainly hold that in judgment, right, and say that this is wrong and bad behavior, but how do we show that knowing that is good news for them, right? Which to her probably means losing lots of money and things like that. And so how do we teach her, and how do we teach each other these sorts of things, right? Not from a position of, oh, we're better than you, but as fellow sinners, right, who have been saved by grace. So just really important thing to think about this holiday season, because obviously many of us are going to interact with that on a much lower level. I like to do extremes like this because extremes help us to deal with less things. Because if we've prepared for the highest weird thing, then we can certainly handle the lowest kind of weird thing, right? And so I want to be clear that, like, you're going to interact with a lot of people this holiday season. Probably already have, right? People in, your community and your family, people who have dealt with a lot of, problems in life. And you are going to be the person who has the opportunity to share with them the good news. And so you always need to be thinking, what do I say to this person in this moment to teach them about the good news? Doesn't mean you jam it down their throats or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. But you have to understand, like, what do I think of myself? How can I humble myself and approach these people with the good news, because it is good news of great joy for all people. All right, that's that. Good thing, this channel isn't monetized, because I certainly would not be making any money on this video if this was on YouTube, or not me, the church, right? This would be the church's channel, but you get what I'm saying. But anyway, I hope you guys found this interesting. Feel free to pass this on to anyone who you think might find it interesting, and I will see all of you on Sunday. So have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and peace out.